Last time, Seleucus regained control of Babylonia and the surrounding satrapies, while the coalition of Cassander, Lysimachus, and Ptolemy had begun a new war against Antigonus. In early 307 BC, Demetrius arrived in Cilicia and decisively defeated the occupying Ptolemaic forces, retaking the province. Ptolemy, seeking to avenge the failure of Leonidas in Cilicia, sailed to Lycia and captured several cities there. Cassander, in response, marched at speed over the Taurus Mountains and reached Halicarnassus in Caria, where he found Ptolemy's fleet besieging the city, which fled in the face of his army back to the Isle of Kos. Upon his arrival at Kos, Ptolemy summoned Antigonus' nephew Ptolemaeus to him. Meeting the young man, Ptolemy had made an assessment of him, found him to have an untrustworthy and overly ambitious character, and so had him poisoned with hemlock. Polyperchon, scheming to regain his lost status, summoned Heracles, the illegitimate son of Alexander, who was now 17. He began writing letters to his own friends and to the enemies of Cassander, promoting the cause of Heracles. Next, he concluded an alliance with the Aetolian League in order to seize the throne, and they gathered together an army of 20,000 infantry and 1,000 cavalry. This army, led by Polyperchon, marched north and was encamped at Stymphaeum in the highlands of Epirus, when Cassander arrived with his army. Cassander sent an envoy to Polyperchon and offered him a substantial position in his court, 100 talents, and command over the Peloponnese, if he would kill Heracles. Polyperchon agreed to this, and had Heracles strangled to death. Seeking now to make good on his promise to enforce the conditions of the old treaty and liberate the Greek cities, Ptolemy invaded the Peloponnese. He took a few cities, but found to his frustration that the Greeks there provided none of the support they had promised him, so he made peace with Cassander, left his own garrisons in the liberated cities, and sailed back to Egypt. Cleopatra, the sister of Alexander who Perdiccas had sought to marry back before the First War, now sought to marry Ptolemy, which would have given him a legitimate claim on the throne. Finding out about the plan, Antigonus ordered the governor of Sardis to arrest and execute her, which he then pretended to have been the work of a group of women, who he made a show of punishing. This now left only 2 members of Alexander the Great's direct family alive, his wife Roxana and his posthumous son Alexander IV, who was now nearly 14, the age at which he could begin making decisions for himself and start to become a man. Since the death of Olympias, they had both been in the strict custody of Cassander. With the rest of the family dead, and with Alexander beginning to become a threat to Cassander's legitimacy, the regent had his ward and his mother quietly executed. The royal line was extinct, and the Macedonian Empire, which had for some time only existed in a de jure fashion, was officially over. Demetrius was now sent by his father to do as Ptolemy had attempted, liberate the cities of Greece from Cassander. His first target was Athens itself, which he besieged and took. The Athenians were overjoyed, and they voted to build statues of Demetrius and Antigonus, and henceforth perform annual games in their honour, among other accolades. After securing more of Attica, an order came from Antigonus, ordering Demetrius to assault the Ptolemaic stronghold of Cyprus. In the spring of 306 BC, Demetrius landed his soldiers on the north of the Carpathian Peninsula, and marched south to the capital city of Salamis, which he invested with a siege. Ptolemy set off from Egypt with a substantial fleet to relieve the city. Demetrius took charge of his own fleet and confronted Ptolemy in the waters outside the city. While Ptolemy won his flank of the battle, the rest of his line was shattered by Demetrius, who personally was engaged in the thick of the fighting. Ptolemy had lost 140 ships, sank or captured, and fled back to Egypt with what little remained. Cyprus fell to the Antigonid forces in their greatest triumph to date. In the aftermath, both Antigonus and Demetrius were hailed as kings. Not wanting to have been seen as lesser than his adversaries, Ptolemy also adopted a regal title, followed by Lysimachus and Cassander. Seleucus, who had been called as such by his Persian subjects for some time now, also adopted the title for his dealings with Greeks. Riding high on his naval victory, now Antigonus decided to invade Egypt itself, something he had never felt sufficiently confident to attempt, and thus finish off Ptolemy once and for all. Demetrius went with a fleet towards the mouth of the Nile, while Antigonus marched overland and was encamped on the east bank of the river. Ptolemy had, in advance, fortified suitable landing grounds on the coast and crossing points along the river, so that neither Antigonid force could make any headway. Disheartened and running low on supplies, Antigonus and Demetrius withdrew back to Syria. Having been unable to succeed against Ptolemy directly, in the following year Antigonus sought to seize control of Rhodes, which had for some time now aligned itself with Ptolemy. Demetrius arrayed a massive fleet, blockaded the island, and then began a siege of the city itself. The Rhodians attempted to discuss terms, but all their envoys were ignored. Left with little choice, the Rhodians fought like hell to defend their city, tearing down their own temples and theatres to build more walls, and so every attempt of Demetrius was foiled. In the middle of 304 BC, after he tried to take Rhodes for over a year, and with the city appearing no sooner to falling, a settlement was finally reached, that Rhodes would provide aid to Antigonus, except against Ptolemy. Demetrius then returned to Athens and resumed his Grecian campaign, liberating many more cities from Cassander. Cassander sent an envoy to Antigonus, asking for his terms, but the only one which would be accepted was complete surrender, an outrageous demand which Cassander would never acquiesce to. After this, Cassander contacted Lysimachus, Ptolemy and Seleucus, and they agreed to jointly coordinate a campaign against Antigonus. Seleucus, while he'd remained neutral up until this point in the conflict, had not been sitting on his hands, far from it. Rather, while the other Diadochi were distracted with their infighting, he had been expanding his holdings to the east. He had campaigned all the way to the easternmost edges of the empire, subduing all of the other satraps there. At the very far east of the empire were the satrapies in the Indus Valley. While during the life of Alexander, the Indian subcontinent was largely divided among many smaller realms, a great empire had arisen under Chandragupta Maurya, or as the Greeks knew him, Sandracotta, who had unified most of the subcontinent. Seleucus crossed into India, but what precisely happened next is also lost. It is possible a battle was fought, which if it did happen, Seleucus likely lost, or at least suffered significant casualties. It is also possible that Seleucus immediately recognised that such a large and powerful empire on the border of his own realm would be a constant source of tension and conflict. Given that Seleucus was more interested in expanding his empire in the west, there was no way he'd be able to consistently defend his eastern border from attack. In any case, a treaty of peace and friendship was drawn up between Seleucus and Chandragupta. Chandragupta would marry one of Seleucus's daughters, Seleucus would cede all his territories in India, as well as some other eastern satrapies, and Chandragupta would provide the Seleucid army with 500 war elephants, which would form the basis of the famed Seleucid Elephant Corps. This peace treaty proved strong, and there would be no future conflicts between the two empires. Besides securing his territories, Seleucus had also set to work developing them by engaging in a substantial city-building program. Babylon was in ruins after the sieges of Demetrius and Antigonus. Seeing an opportunity, Seleucus resolved to build a new capital, constructed in the rational Hellenistic grid style. This city was located to the north of Babylon, on the Tigris rather than the Euphrates. Seleucus consulted the Magi of Babylon to determine what the most auspicious time to begin construction would be. However, the Magi gave him a false time, as they did not want their city to be supplanted in its prominence. The construction workers were waiting for a signal from Seleucus to start when, suddenly, they all heard a voice commanding them to begin digging, and so they dug the foundations in earnest. This was at the genuine propitious hour which the Magi had divined. After this they confessed their falsehood to Seleucus, then told him the city must have been fated to be by the gods, and they begged his forgiveness, which was granted by the bemused king. He named the city after himself. Seleucia would in time come to be one of the most prosperous and populous cities on earth. Seleucus also established dozens of settlements beside this, which were aimed at attracting Greek and Macedonian settlers, who could provide a backbone for the empire's armies. The work Seleucus had done over the last few years would make his empire stable and prosperous for many years to come. In the summer of 302 BC, Cassander made the first move in the new allied campaign against Antigonus. He sent part of his army to join Lysimachus's army, and then advanced into Asia Minor, while he himself attacked Demetrius in Thessaly. Lysimachus met with great success, and marched down the western Anatolian coast, conquering much of it. Hearing of this, Antigonus immediately raised an army and departed from Syria towards Lysimachus with great alacrity. Lysimachus did not want to meet Antigonus in battle until Seleucus arrived with his army, so he made a forced march away to the city of Dorylaeum, which had both copious supplies and a strongly defensible position. Antigonus followed and besieged the city for months, until the food inside was running low. Lysimachus waited until a stormy night and then marched his whole army away under the veil of darkness. Antigonus tried to follow the next day, but the rains had made the roads extremely muddy and they could not go in good order, so he retired for the season. The news of Seleucus' entry into the war came to him shortly after, and, growing worried, Antigonus ordered Demetrius to abandon Greece and come to him with his army at once. Demetrius dutifully negotiated a truce with Cassander and then sailed for Asia. Cassander, not holding to his agreement with Demetrius, immediately attacked Thessaly and sent an army to reinforce Lysimachus. However, this army was hit by a mighty storm, and few of the men survived the crossing to Asia. Ptolemy, meanwhile, set out north to invade Antigonus' kingdom. He conquered Coele Syria, but then received false intelligence that Seleucus and Lysimachus had been defeated, and that Antigonus was on his way to Syria. Believing this report, Ptolemy retreated back to Egypt. Seleucus then crossed into Cappadocia and encamped there for the winter. He brought with him a mighty army, 20,000 infantry, 12,000 cavalry, 480 elephants, and over 100 scythed chariots. A far cry from the small force with which Seleucus had retaken Babylon some 10 years earlier. Once the winter ended, in early 301 BC, Seleucus was able to combine his force with the armies of Cassander and Lysimachus, and they readied themselves to fight Antigonus. The two sides met near the town of Ipsus in Phrygia. The allied army had 64,000 infantry, some 15,000 cavalry, as well as the chariots and elephants provided by Seleucus. The Antigonid force numbered 70,000 infantry, 10,000 cavalry, and 75 elephants. This would, to this point in history, be one of the largest battles ever fought. The sheer size of both armies quietened Antigonus' usually confident spirit and made him more circumspect. He went to his men and told them that Demetrius was to succeed him should he die. Once the battle began, Demetrius took the place of honour on the right wing and led the best Antigonid cavalry in a charge, including a young exile from Epirus named Pyrrhus. He was met by Antiochus, the now 22-year-old son of Seleucus, but Demetrius easily routed him. The Antigonid prince pursued the fleeing Seleucid cavalry, but made a terrible error and pursued them for too long, removing the best Antigonid cavalry from the battlefield. Seleucus, seeing this, dispatched some of his elephants to harass Demetrius and prevent his cavalry from rejoining the battle. The rest of the elephants engaged Antigonus' elephants head-on. Seleucus then led his cavalry unopposed around the flank of the Antigonid army, but did not immediately charge at them. The Antigonid phalangites, seeing the massive cavalry force massed in their rear, now began to surrender to Seleucus, or simply ran for their lives. Antigonus, in the rear of the army himself, held out hope that Demetrius might arrive to rescue the army and perhaps still seize victory from the jaws of defeat. But it was not to be, and Antigonus died when he was struck by a hail of javelins. His senior officers fled, except one man, Thorax, who stayed to protect his king's body. Paying tribute to their fallen foe, the allies had Antigonus buried with royal honours. Demetrius, meanwhile, took his cavalry and gathered up what stragglers for the infantry he could, 9,000 men in all, and fled south to Ephesus. Going from there, he fled towards Athens, hoping that those who he had liberated would grant him shelter. When he reached the Cyclades, he was met by an Athenian ambassador who informed him that the democracy had decided not to allow him into the city. Though many of his garrisons in the Peloponnese had defected to Cassander, Demetrius placed Pyrrhus in charge of what was left, and then sailed north to Chersonesos in Thrace, with the intention of launching a piratical campaign against Lysimachus. Back in Asia, the victorious kings began to divide Antigonus' territories up amongst themselves. Cassander laid claim to all of Antigonus' holdings in Greece, and gave his brother Pleistarchus the satrapies of Caria and Cilicia. Lysimachus took the north and remaining west of Anatolia. Seleucus won for himself the Anatolian interior, and both Syrias. When Seleucus arrived in Syria, however, he found that Ptolemy had already installed garrisons in the cities of Kole, Syria. Ptolemy was outraged at having been left out of the post-war division, even though he had been on their side in the war. Seleucus pointed out to him that the spoils of war only go to those who actually fight, but in the interest of their long friendship, he would permit Ptolemy to retain the territories he had annexed. Antigonid forces still garrisoned and managed to defend parts of Phoenicia, however, notably the cities of Tyre and Sidon. Given the already existing border tensions between Seleucus and Ptolemy, it seems like the cities were left alone by both sides, in case the taking of them should provoke the other into action. Next time, Seleucus goes on a settling spree, political tensions increase across the Greek world, and the next generation of Hellenistic rulers arise. If you have any comments, criticism, or questions, please post them below. And thank you for listening.